and welcome to Newswire. I'm Ayza Omar. It's a brand new week. A lot has happened over the weekend. What we will at Newswire be talking about are two specific stories. One is Libya and what has been happening there, and also after the break, a little about Israel and the elections as they will start from tomorrow on Tuesday. So let me start with the North African country, which has had no central government since Gaddafi's removal in 2011. There are now competing centers of power with militias, with wavering loyalties. They're all coming to a head as clashes escalate there. Now, this scene is being set for yet another battle for Tripoli, it seems, and in turn, the takeover of the country. Now, on one side is the Tripoli-based and internationally recognized government of Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj, and on the other hand, we have General Khalifa Haftar in the east, who served under Colonel Gaddafi and whose National Liberation Army is made up of various militias and backed by international forces, which we will be talking about extensively also. Now, Haftar is an ex-general who came back to Libya just in the nick of time from the United States back in 2011 at the beginning of the political turmoils here in Libya, and says that he is committed to defying every violent extremist group by all means for the benefit of the entire nation. There are reports that he himself is a naturalized American citizen and in fact lived very close to the CIA headquarters in the States for 20 years. Now, there has been clashes in the south of the capital where fighting continues to go on. Now, despite UN calling for a 2-hour truce as forces of Khalifa Haftar and the internationally recognized government continue to exchange airstrikes. There are reports coming in that up till now 50 people have been killed. The US is pulling its troops from Libya. This announcement came from the Pentagon just recently. A small contingent of American troops were based there in Libya in recent years, helping local forces combat IS and Al-Qaeda militants, as well as protecting diplomatic facilities. India has also evacuated a small contingent of peacekeepers. The Indian Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj, said that the country's 15 Central Reserve Police Force peacekeepers were evacuated over the weekend from Tripoli because the situation in Libya has suddenly worsened and fighting has moved into the capital city. Now, technically, Libya is a wealthy nation with $80 billion in oil revenue and foreign reserves, which are, of course, managed by the government in Tripoli. But General Khalifa Haftar, who has also seized various oil fields in the south and in the east of the country, is now pushing his forces, advancing towards Tripoli, of course, igniting fears of a full-on conflict. So what is the Libyan National Army that General Haftar is leading? Who can the Prime Minister Sarraj rely on for support? And here talk about locally and internationally those who are involved. And these militias who are backing both the governments in various forms, where are their loyalties? So in order to introduce this entire topic, it's a big, wide topic. We will try to get around it as fast as we can with our experts. Let me introduce them. First of all, we have Mr. Riccardo Fabiani, a geopolitical analyst who is joining us from London. Welcome to the show, Mr. Fabiani. And we have Mr. Jalel Harchaoui, who is a research fellow at the Clingendale Institute. It is an independent think tank in Diplomatic Academy, and he's joining us from The Hague. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Riccardo, if we could get an overview and your point of view on what has unfolded in the past 2 weeks in Libya.
I think it's quite clear that we are witnessing a significant escalation, first of all, which is just a provocation by Haftar or an attempt to position himself to extract, let's say, a better deal or a better arrangement. This is a full-on military escalation to take over Tripoli and to put an end to the conflict that has effectively divided the country since 2011. This is at least the plan he is trying to pursue. It doesn't mean that he can actually achieve this plan. It doesn't mean that he can easily take Tripoli, but that's what he's trying to do, and he's got some support, tacit or less tacit, from international powers to do so, which is not necessarily the case for the other side that is fighting against. If we look at the government of national accord in Tripoli, if we look at the militias that Haftar is fighting against, they don't enjoy the same degree of international support. And therefore, what we're seeing here is, at least from an international perspective, an uneven battle for the conquest of Tripoli.
Okay. So the overview is pretty much like that. The two governments have been at loggerheads since 2011, of course. Now, to get an idea, Mr. Jalal could quickly give us an idea of what life in Libya has been like since then. There was a brief truce between the two governments in 2015 over the Libyan political agreement. What happened since then?
There was an installation that was really facilitated by three states or four states, primarily the United States, Italy, Britain, to a lesser extent Algeria, and that's how the current government of national accord that's still in place in Tripoli at this moment was installed in late 2015, early 2016. And the primary reason those states were so interested in doing that was because at the time, the Islamic State, Daesh, had control over a whole town on the coast, Sirte. And there was also a migration crisis. You had up to 10,000 people making it into Italy every month. So there was an urgency to install some kind of a friendly government, maybe a powerless one, but at least an official one that could facilitate whatever interventions needed to be made. And all of that was done. Both crises were actually resolved from the perspective of Western powers. And now we end up with this remnant government that has always been rather powerless, but it also gave rise to those very powerful militias that do not obey the official government in Tripoli, but are very powerful. And the goal, I think, well, part of the calculus on the part of Marshal Haftar was to kind of be met with less resistance from those militias. And the big surprise since Thursday or Friday is that those militias actually are holding the capital on their own. They're resisting quite effectively, and that wasn't really part of the plan. So that explains why Marshal was tempted to go in, because of the weakness of the government in Tripoli and all the international support that's behind him. And this the net result of his brutal approach was to instigate, to catalyze a better resistance against him. So that was kind of counterproductive. And what has been happening was not exactly what he had in mind.
So Haftar didn't expect the kind of resistance he's facing now?
He's going for an easy walk in the park. He wanted something similar to what he was able to achieve in the southwest of the country, which is an operation that had some ugly sides, but overall, in the grand scheme of things, was a success. It was done quite shrewdly. There was a lot of pragmatic deals that were peaceful with the local actors, a little bit of violence here and there, some abuses, but overall it was a success. And I think the idea, I'm absolutely certain that the idea was to kind of use roughly a similar approach. And it was encouraged by foreign actors because they thought he was going to kind of use the same technique. So you have quite a bit of, you have a large set of actors that are happy to violate the arms embargo, for example.
Sorry, Mr. Jalal, hold that thought. Let me pull in Riccardo here in this conversation. Riccardo, on one side, we see General Haftar being backed by these states' international players. On the other side, there's this conversation going on by critics that General Haftar's goal is to be a perfect ally for the Western countries by supporting secularist forces within Libya. Do you agree that this is his true intentions? Because he seems to play on this rhetoric a lot, that is West's weakness, that I am after the extremists, I'm after IS, Al-Qaeda. And so do you believe that this is just playing on the emotions of the West, trying to get their support, or this is exactly his plan and he will carry it through?
To the Western implicit or explicit support for Haftar than simply his secularist position or his, let's say, antagonistic stance vis-a-vis Islamist groups. I also think that the fact that he's been able to take over oil facilities, for example, without disrupting oil production and oil exports, basically guaranteeing the continuous flow of oil volumes from Libya into European and global markets has been, I think, for example, a key guarantee, a key demonstration that Haftar can bring stability exactly like his Western partners wanted. And another I would say, enabling factor has been, for example, the decline in migration from Libya to Europe, which has basically made the stabilization of Libya in a way less urgent, or if you like, a deal, a grand bargain from between the two sides, less urgent, and has effectively enabled Haftar to do what he was planning to do with a sort of tacit support and agreement from Western powers, because Libya has become effectively less urgent, less critical than before. So if you add to this Haftar's aggressive stance towards Islamist groups, which is not something that is necessarily seen as a problem from a Western perspective, then you see how effectively the European powers and the US are, more or less okay or happy with him taking over the country, and they're not likely to do much to stop him.
It's interesting because Mr. Jalal, there's this argument that whenever it comes to his rhetoric, while he does hold this in common with the Egyptian leadership, that he is after the Muslim Brotherhood, but at the same time in his speeches he doesn't seem to mention Muslim Brotherhood directly. It seems to be more for the audience in the West who is threatened. Europe is threatened by the IS, is threatened by Al-Qaeda. So how do you see it? Is this a fight over ideology, or is this a power grab over finding somebody to take place or control over the oil wealth that Libya is sitting on?
It's all of the above. We're talking about a conflict that has spread over a long period of time. It's been going on for 8 years. His military campaign, I'm talking more about Marshal Haftar, has been going on for half a decade. That's a long period of time, and it's over a huge territory. So if you do pay attention to the excuses or the rhetoric or the pretext that he uses, they change. When he went into the south, he was after gangsters, and sometimes against Chadian rebels, and sometimes against terrorists. Now, he's talking about the Muslim Brotherhood again regarding Tripoli, but he's also talking about a fight against corruption, which implies that the eastern part of the country is not corrupt. That's obviously a big assumption. The eastern part of Libya is corrupt as well. But you see that he's basically happy to utilize any kind of argument that could seduce this foreign state or this other foreign state. He's talking to the Western states, he's talking to the Gulf states, and so on and so forth. So he has a huge audience, and he's happy to change his story as long as he continues to derive political prestige and political recognition and political power out of this discourse until he rules over the entire country. And that has been his plan all over. And you see, if you look at the other countries next door, whether it's Chad or Egypt, you've had a similar story, except that there was not necessarily a civil war, but you have the same kind of quid pro quo. I give you security, I give you a unified authoritarian state, and in exchange, you protect me as I stay in power. It's very old.
Is a big cause for the US. They lost an ambassador there to one of the extremist groups that Haftar claims to be fighting, the Ansar al-Sharia. The US ambassador Chris Stevens was killed by them. Now, while Pentagon has moved out their troops, but in the overall picture, something that Mr. Jalal highlighted, we need to see beyond the excuses. What is the evolution of power here? Libya is obviously a crucial key member of the OPEC also for its natural resources, for the oil rent it generates. How can you summarize for us the geostrategic importance that it has here?
Libya, I would say, is key to the European countries in particular from a migration, a security and oil perspective. And more generally and more globally, obviously, Libya plays a key role in the stabilization of North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, given its numerous links to the Sahelian states, for example, that are close to it, but also I'm thinking about Egypt. The border with Egypt is obviously extremely sensitive, particularly from the Egyptian perspective, given the numerous jihadist activities and terrorist activities that have been taking place across it. And Algeria also looks at Libya with some serious concern, given that they also share a pretty long porous border with Libya and Tunisia as well. So Libya is key to the stability of North Africa. It's key to the migration and oil issues that are obviously sensitive and important for Europe. I would argue that probably from an American perspective, Libya has sort of lost its relevance, its centrality because of the reorganization, let's say, of US presence and US power across the globe, a different understanding and interpretation of the role of the United States, particularly in the Middle East and North Africa. But more in general, Libya has this key role for all its neighbors and its expanded, let's say, neighborhood. And the stabilization of this country is obviously important in that perspective.
Right. And Mr. Jalal, we are seeing this huge sort of wave going through North Africa. We've seen Tunisia being affected, Algeria being affected, Libya is in trouble, Egypt is continuously mediating between Israel and Palestinians. So, I mean, it seems almost like a resurgence of the Arab Spring.
Yes and no, because if you look at Algeria, for example, if you look at the popular narrative regarding Algeria is that it's a big successful democracy, but at the same time, what has happened on the ground is progress of the military power there. So we've had those false alarms on multiple occasions where we think that we're out of the woods, that we're progressing towards more liberal democracy. In the end, the crisis, the uncertainty, the chaos is taken advantage by states that are very well organized, very much determined to install a form of governance that fits them. What I'm saying is that when you listen to the Western states, they talk a lot about liberal democracy, but indeed, when you look at their behavior, they're not doing much for it, and they're kind of happy to see authoritarian regimes
exactly
here and
these
there.
states implode within themselves. And now the UN chief go and visit Libya. He's just returned, and he's tweeted earlier, and let me read this out: "I leave Libya with a heavy heart and deeply concerned. I still hope it is possible to avoid a bloody confrontation in and around Tripoli." He goes on to say the UN is committed to facilitating a political solution. Whatever happens, the UN is committed to supporting the Libyan people. This is Antonio Guterres. Very quickly, since we've got the last minute, if I could get your comments, Mr. Riccardo and Mr. Jalal, we'll start from you. How do you see this unfolding from here onwards? What's the future?
First of all, we have to accept that this is a situation of radical uncertainty, which means that anybody who says that they can predict the future is lying. Haftar could win, Haftar could lose it all, or we could have also a quagmire, and we would still be having a similar conversation 2 years from now or 3 years from now. So that's what I can say with a high level of comfort. We don't know.
Okay. And Mr. Jalal, while you answer that, also a quick addendum to the question, does it even matter what the Libyan people want? Does it make any difference?
The habit, when you look at the international community, to when they talk about Libya, they don't talk about the population. They don't talk about it as a society anymore. They look at it through maybe 3 dimensions. Is oil flowing? Are the migrants reaching Europe? Is there a jihadi threat? When those 3 issues are subdued, there's a huge amount of complacency, and nobody really cares about the suffering. We've had already
so Mr. Riccardo,
50 deaths.
Let me ask Mr. Riccardo, since we've got the last 30 seconds, very quickly, what's on it?
I agree with Jalel. These 3 issues are all that matter from a Western perspective. And when it comes to the possible evolution of the current situation, it's very hard to predict.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Riccardo Fabiani and Mr. Jalel Harchaoui, for joining us, giving us time to Newswire. This is definitely an ongoing issue, and we'll keep you up to date on Indus News. But right now, we will take a quick short break. Newswire will be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Newswire with me, Ayza Omar. Now the second story that we will be discussing. Britain has slammed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's planned annexation of illegal Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. Now, this comes days after the main challenger to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel's elections condemned the premier's deeply controversial pledge to annex West Bank settlements, calling it an irresponsible bid for votes. Netanyahu gave the statement while in an interview to a news channel. Now, UK's acting Minister for Middle East, Mark Field, has also come out with a strong statement. In that statement, he says Jewish settlements in West Bank are illegal and a threat to achieving the 2-state solution. Field also said that annexing the occupation over Palestine has created a brazen violation under international law. He also went on to say that all parties should step up its efforts to de-escalate the current tensions in Palestine to aid peaceful environment for the people there. But that's the question, really. Who are these parties that he's calling out to participate in? Because as far as we know, at the international community, and despite the UN resolutions that also condemn Israel's annexations and excessive use of force, there is continuous outcry from human rights groups. There is a rapidly increasing death count of innocent Palestinian children, women and men. So these continue to take do not continue to take an effective action against Israel's excessive force and illegitimate occupation. And as a result of this latest statement, we see Netanyahu going for the final push. Will he win the elections as a result of this? Because he did use a similar rhetoric in the last elections in 2015. He used statements which could almost be called bigoted. For example, I quote, "The Arabs are going to the polls in droves," and it seemed to work. Back then, he had declared there would be no independent Palestinian under his watch. And now, as he is heading to the polls on Tuesday, he says a vote for the opposition will be a vote for Arab minority. With its recent annexation of the Golan Heights and its ally, US's unwavering support, where does this leave the plight of the Palestinians? Let's find out more in this discussion. For this, I would like to introduce my guests. First of all, we have with us Mr. Tayseer Mehasen, also a political analyst from Gaza. And we have Mr. Feras Qawasmeh, a Palestinian researcher for the Vision Center for Political Development in Istanbul. Welcome to Newswire, both of you. I'd like to start with you, Mr. Tayseer. Of this current situation, can you give us an assessment of whether Netanyahu's rhetoric is just plainly a win for a vote count as elections about to start tomorrow, or is there a real threat on how things have evolved from Israel in the past year or two?
Thank you, Ayza. First of all, I would like to say that Netanyahu is using a strong propaganda against a rivalry, such as accusing them of supporting Iran nuclear and deal of their determination to uproot thousands of settlers from West Bank settlement in favor of peace with the Palestinians. That's the main thing. And if we talk about the MAP party, maps in Israel, or who is going to election tomorrow, we can say that Netanyahu, he has a big chance to win in this election. I can say the first scenario for that election, Netanyahu, he will get at least 55 to 60% from the voters from the seats of Knesset, especially when we talk about the right wing, which is Likud is the main center in this bloc, which is Netanyahu is the head of Likud party. The other party, which is called the left bloc, guided now by a party of white and blue against the party, maybe we will get 40 to 45% of the election, which is going tomorrow. Netanyahu, why I think that Netanyahu will win this election, I think there is fifth points for that. First of all, the Israeli society is reportedly leaning towards the extreme right. Netanyahu is a prominent leader in this right-wing bloc.
Right.
The second thing, Netanyahu policy during the previous wisdom period has achieved a strategic achievement. Most notably Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and the transfer of the embassy to from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Third is Trump's decision to take over Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. The fifth, the promise of Trump to recognize settlements in West Bank as under sovereignty of Israel.
So, Mr. Feras, let me pull you into this conversation, but I want to find out from you and for our viewers, so if you're trying to understand when he says annexation of the West Bank, the geopolitical situation there in the West Bank, it is governed by not just a Palestinian Authority, but also Israel. Could you hash out for us what is left for the Palestinians, how much land is under Palestinians, how much of it is with Israel?
Thank you, Ayza. First of all, let me help the viewers to know the political situation in West Bank. In fact, in 1948, almost 78% of the Palestinian lands were occupied by Israel. In 1967, the remaining 22% were occupied, which is called West Bank and Gaza Strip. In 1993, we had what is called Oslo Accords, and one of the main important output or results of this accord is that Palestinian lands in West Bank were divided into three main parts, which is called Area A, Area B, Area C. So Area C is representing 60% of West Bank lands, and it is under full control of Israeli control. In this area, for example, there are 400 Palestinians living there. They are suffering on daily basis. They are lacking of their basic needs such as health, water, and education even. So talking about Area A and B, which is constituting almost 40% of West Bank, in other words, it's less than 10% of the Palestinian historical lands. Palestinians, in fact, don't have a real sovereignty over this area, in fact. Talking about the settlements in West Bank, and it is unfortunate that the number of Israeli settlement has increased from the number of settlers has increased from less than 200,000 Israeli settlers just before Oslo Accords to more than 700,000 Israeli settlers nowadays. The number of Israeli settlements now in West Bank, more than 160 settlements. There are also more than 260 outposts in West Bank. So this kind of situation has made the situation, has made the situation in West Bank very complicated. Now we are having almost 165 unconnected islands in West Bank, or in other words, unconnected spots, geographically unconnected spots. So here there is a question should be raised about the possibility of having a Palestinian state on this unconnected geographically places and spots.
It is a very difficult strategy and vision as the settlements are entangled between Palestinians settlements and Israeli settlements. There's also the question about the fair play. How does Israel carry out its responsibilities while governing? Because like you mentioned, the Oslo Accords, it was understood that they will share custody over the responsibility over security, the economics of the region, the trade, and etc. Has Israel delivered to that agreement at all, or has, like the settlements growing, Israeli settlements growing, violated these terms and conditions?
For sure not. Israel has took advantage of this Oslo Accord to its interest, in fact, and the Palestinian interest was not achieved at all. I'll just give you one example. Israel now in West Bank is controlling more than 86% of the water, the underground water. Those 400 Palestinian thousand who are living in Area C are not getting their needs, in fact. And even when we talk about Area A and Area C, there are 3 million Palestinians living there, and they don't really have the complete and the complete sovereignty over this area. So it is just a name that we are having a Palestinian state over there. If you want to talk about the daily aggressive action, Israeli aggressive action, there are on daily basis there are a lot of arrests for Palestinians. There are killings of Palestinians. A lot of homes have been demolishing in Area C and even in Jerusalem, if you want to talk about Jerusalem. So if we want to evaluate the Oslo Accords, I can say that Israel has took far advantage of this accord, and while the Palestinians has been losing their lands since 1993. So comparing now in numbers, it's not my opinion. If you compare now in numbers,
these are facts. Yes, absolutely. These are facts. Right. Not only just taking advantage, as you say, taking advantage or even violating the Oslo Accords. We are now joined by Mr. Moin Naim, a political analyst who is joining us from Istanbul. Welcome so much, Mr. Naim, for joining the conversation. The entire debate about how Prime Minister Netanyahu has brazenly come out and said that I will annex those settlements in the West Bank. Who are we talking about when we know that UK has come out and given a statement saying this is outrageous, it is illegal already, the occupation of the West Bank by Israel. Who else is there who stands against Israel on this statement?
In fact, the Turkey President just 10 minutes ago had the press release and a press conference saying that this is an illegal against all the international laws. But the problem is that the Israeli occupation, with the absolute American support, need no support or any and don't care about any against the issue. And the other problem is that it's not only Netanyahu who's talking about this. Today in the Israeli government, we have three main parties who are racing on the election. All of them speaking about adding or annexation of land of West Bank. Even one of them is talking about annexation of all the West Bank to the Israeli occupation government, lands. This is the issue. The matter is not who's with or who's against. We have had 70 years of occupation in Palestine, and we had a lot of decisions and a lot of decisions in the United Nations or the Council, but no one of these rules is applied. The problem is that it's Israel with the U.S. full support don't care about anything, neither who's supporting nor who's against them.
It's a really good point, because while Israel continues to have the unwavering support of Trump's administration, they have also taken a big U-turn on their foreign policy by endorsing Israel's move of annexing Golan Heights. But the question really is, does it matter, as Mr. Moin said, and this question is for you, Mr. Tayseer, does it matter whoever comes into government in Israel, irrespective of who's leading the polls right now, if all of them have the same strategy, which is to overtake as much land as they can from the Palestinians?
Regarding this point, I think the people of Palestine is looking to all parties in Israel as same. There is no difference between Likud and others parties in Israel. Maybe some Palestinian politician is dividing between the parties in Israel, but the work in the land, let me see something. The Labour Party, who is looking from somebody as better than Likud, is more aggressive against Palestinian rights during decades. Most of the confiscation of lands, most of the launch wars against Palestinians is done by Labour parties. That means all parties and Israeli state occupation have main goals towards the area, the Palestinian people in Palestinian land, which is depends on no state for Palestinian people.
Right.
Only they can accept some Palestinians in the cities, which is in West Bank now. And we can see, as our colleague said, if you look to West Bank now, you can say there is no possible to make any state for Palestinian people regarding what's happening. Israel is capturing everything in the West Bank and divided West Bank to different areas, as we say in Oslo Accord, Area B, Area C, Area A, and
right.
And we can say even Israel is toward the war decision words, as we say, as we know, the international law is looking to Gaza and West Bank as the occupied territories and the land of which is land of state of Palestine, but Israel is refusing to accept any resolution coming from the United Nations. Up to now, there is
right. No, it doesn't really seem to make any difference what the United Nations has said so far, or even if the UK has come out and slammed Netanyahu's statement that he gave about annexation of West Bank. I mean, the UN Resolution 242 outright says that there will be no such action taken by Israel. But irrespective, Mr. Feras, let me come to you and ask you a little about the factions within, the political factions, the divisions within the Palestinians themselves. They could not be helping in this situation, or is there a chance that they might now unite finally to fight this possibility of annexation of the settlements in West Bank?
Yes, I do believe that despite the internal Palestinian disputes, all main factions of Palestinians, mainly Fatah and Hamas, they all agree on the rejection of what is called the century of deal, because this deal is geographically dividing West Bank itself into too many areas, as I have mentioned before, and grants that there is no such kind of connection between Gaza Strip and West Bank. So I do believe that despite all disagreements, internal Palestinian disagreements between the two main parties of Palestinians, Hamas and Fatah, still they both agree on the rejection of this century deal. However, I also still believe that Palestinians need to place what is happening on West Bank, especially in West Bank, since we are talking about the annexation of Palestinian lands in West Bank. They need to place this kind of complicated situation in the top of their agenda, in the top of their decision-making agenda. I think that this might be something missing or not satisfactory by the Palestinian factions.
Okay, and Mr. Moin, let me ask you, the EU has continuously come out and said that they will unveil a long-awaited Middle East peace plan after the Israeli election. My question to you is, what good is this peace plan when they've already clearly shown their bias or their partiality towards Israel by endorsing Golan Heights now, and then last year recognizing East Jerusalem as part of Israel?
Unfortunately, Mr. Trump's peace thoughts depends on or build on the stealing of the lands of the countries around Israeli occupation lands. The problem is that they don't believe in peace except if it's built on the outcomes of Israel, and they don't think any about the people living in the region. For example, accepting Jerusalem as the occupation, of the capital city of Israeli occupation country, accepting the Golan Heights, or accepting the addition of Golan Heights to the Israeli occupation land. And now we are talking about a plan which is built on getting lands from all the countries in the region and give it to Israel. For example, what we have heard about, no official document is released yet, but they're speaking about adding land, getting land from Egypt, from Jordan, and even from Saudi Arabia, all only to sort out the needs of the Israeli occupation regime. So I think that after this election, what we will be facing is a new occupation era of the region. We had the first one in 1948, in 1917, and the second one in 1948, and the last one was in 1967. And now, I think during the Trump era, we will leave the new occupation era by adding more land. So
that's a really dismal picture you paint there, Mr. Moin. And since running out of time, I just want the closing remarks from you, Mr. Feras. The very idea that while America remains one of the permanent members of the UN Security Council, it has the power to veto. What hope is there really for the Palestinians to leave alone get their land back, but to live in peace?
Yes, in fact, for us as Palestinians, I believe that we need to have as soon as possible what is called national unity or national reconciliation, because we cannot face this kind of a very big challenge alone. Hamas cannot face it alone, and Fatah cannot face it alone. So what is needed now is to have a national reconciliation between the
political factions need to come together. I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you there, Mr. Tayseer, if I can quickly you in and get your closing remarks.
Yeah, of course. I'm agreed. The Palestinians need to make a coalition government first, and united, all the parties must be united to face this threats from Israel's government, and watch as Netanyahu is prepared to face the new era for the Likud party if he wins the election.
All right. Thank you so much to all of you, Mr. Tayseer, Mr. Moin, Mr. Feras, for joining us, giving us your time and valuable input. We've come to the end of our show. We will be updating you on the story as it develops in the elections that will take place on Tuesday. And with that, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.